Welcome to Voices in the Work, a continuing education podcast from the Texas Opioid Training Initiative. I'm Dr. Lindsay Loetta, Associate Director of the Pharmacy Addictions Research and Medicine Program and Assistant Professor of Practice at the University of Texas at Austin College of Pharmacy. Voices in the Work is designed to share new ideas and fresh perspectives with health professionals and other members of the workforce about substance use disorder prevention, treatment, and recovery. The first season will highlight innovative training strategies used to teach future health professionals about substance use disorders as part of their health professions curricula. This continuing education activity is supported by the Texas Targeted Opioid Response, a public health initiative operated by the Texas Health and Human Services Commission through federal funding from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Additional funding information is available with this podcast. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services, Texas Health and Human Services, or the University of Texas, nor does mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. or Texas government. As a reminder to listeners, all episodes offer continuing education credit. Information about continuing education credit is available in the podcast description. More than a decade ago, 3 people in Austin, Texas set out to make naloxone and overdose prevention education more accessible. Today, that effort has trained thousands of people and become a nationally recognized model for overdose prevention. In this episode, we explore the story of Operation Naloxone. And we are joined by Kate Lower, Director of SHIFT at the University of Texas at Austin and leader of campus efforts focused on substance use prevention and overdose response, including Operation Naloxone. Dr. Delandra Robinson, a first-year pharmacy resident at Parkland Health, graduate of the University of Texas at Austin College of Pharmacy, and a former student director of Operation Naloxone. And Dr. Lucas Hill, Associate Professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Pharmacy, Executive Director of the Implementation and Research Center for Healthy Communities, and co-founder of Operation Naloxone. Lucas, I'm wondering if you can start us off, take us back to 2015, 2016. What was happening at the time that led you, Lori Holleran-Steiker, and Mark Kinsley to start a program like Operation Naloxone?
Well, thanks, Lindsay, for inviting me. And I think it's a really cool conversation, an important program to highlight. And you've underplayed your role in all of it. You're not just a podcast moderator. You were one of the key contributors during the early phases as a pharmacy student. So I'm glad you're part of the discussion. By 2015, opioid overdose was the leading cause of accidental death in the United States. And it was maybe more pronounced in some other states, but it was certainly on the rise in Texas. And we didn't have good systems to identify it and ensure appropriate reporting of overdose deaths. When Texas passed legislation in 2015 allowing for legal distribution of naloxone without a prescription, it created an opening for UT Austin leaders to act. I was fortunate to arrive that same year as a new faculty member after implementing a naloxone co-prescribing program in 3 family health centers up in Pittsburgh. So I was sort of in the right place at the right time. I connected with Lori Holleran-Steiker, who was a renowned professor who created the Recovery High School, had been key to the development of the Center for Students in Recovery at UT Austin, and had already laid some of the groundwork with University Health Services and other leaders on campus, identifying a need to be responsive and proactive about overdose prevention efforts on campus. We also were acquainted with Mark Kinsley, a really well-respected harm reductionist who was active in the community, had played a role in advocating for that naloxone access legislation. And he alerted us to reports of 3 overdose deaths among students that had occurred during a recent few months off campus in a way that the university may otherwise never have known about. So that connection to the community really was what sparked awareness and energy to do something. And I think I was helpful because me having the PharmD credential made everybody feel a little bit more comfortable with the idea of deploying what historically had been a prescription medication in a new environment and providing appropriate training to key individuals across campus and making sure that we were being as flexible as possible, distributing this key overdose response rescue medication as broadly as possible, while not running afoul of any legal requirements, and documenting everything appropriately.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for giving us that history into Operation Naloxone, and really appreciate you too being able to share where you, Lori, and Mark were all coming from when this started. Now that we have, a little bit of history, can you all tell us and the listeners, for someone who doesn't have any context to what Operation Naloxone is, what is it? What involves the Operation Naloxone initiative?
Operation Naloxone is a student-driven opioid overdose education and naloxone distribution program launched at UT Austin in 2016. To our knowledge, it was the first ever robust campus overdose prevention program in the United States, and it operates by training students, staff, and community members to recognize opioid overdose, which is an excessive amount of opioid in the brain shutting down a person's intrinsic drive to breathe, and then administering naloxone, also known as Narcan. Essentially, when somebody is experiencing an opioid related overdose, their lung function slows, oxygen in their blood is depleted, and their heart and brain eventually stop working. Naloxone is an opioid antagonist or blocker that can rapidly reverse the effects of opioids and restore normal breathing.
So, Operation Naloxone, it's a primarily student-led initiative where we give trainings surrounding opioid overdose education and how to respond in an emergency. And so the trainings are typically about 60 minutes long. Um, they're inclusive, non-judgmental. Students are encouraged to ask questions and interact with us. We go over the history of the opioid crisis, a little bit of opioid pharmacology, and then we get into how to recognize an opioid overdose. What are you looking for? What signs? So, unresponsiveness, the pinpoint pupils, shallow breathing, and we explain that and then show them how to use naloxone. And then by the end of the training, we give them resources for local risk reduction organizations, and we also provide naloxone for the students to carry with them.
Operational Naloxone is the access, distribution, and education of opioid overdose. And so, in addition to the training, there's a number of what we call open distribution sites and then emergency sites. And so, emergency sites are those places like residence halls, libraries, and a bunch of different places around campus. And that's beyond Austin, even, since our campus spans really across the state. But emergency sites really are those places that have naloxone on hand. If an emergency happens, someone in that building has access to naloxone to intervene. And then our open distribution sites are really open to anyone in our UT Austin community. So any student, faculty, staff, community member can come and get naloxone or Narcan specifically for free and anonymously. And this has been an evolving effort to establish these distribution sites, starting with Lucas and his team in the libraries. And then we've seen that grow where we now have over 10 open distribution sites that anyone can come and get naloxone from. And so they don't have to go through a training for that. That is just a resource that's available. We've given out thousands, tens of thousands of doses at this time. And then the training is this really nice other kind of arm of Operation Naloxone that is very much student-driven in partnership with our office. That is a really nice balance between student perspective, and not only that, but a student expert, right? So a pharmacy student that really knows and has a deep knowledge and understanding of the issues, and then someone from our team, which is a more public health. And it's been a really nice partnership and balance of the work. And so I think Operation Naloxone is both of that. It's really environmental in that it's making it a resource accessible, but then it's also educational in that it's informing and empowering our audience to intervene and save a life.
Wow. That's so cool. And how many, between the emergency sites and the open distribution sites, how many sites exist today?
Gosh, what a great question. And it literally just changed like last week. So I should have been a little bit better prepared. We have about 34 emergency sites. And I think that number just went up to about 40. And then we have 9 open distribution sites. And that number just went up to, oh gosh, about 13 or 14, I think. We just had our libraries. We were kind of an open distribution site in our main library, and recently our libraries were like, you know what, let's make all of the UT Austin libraries open distribution sites. So there's several libraries across this large campus that we now get to kind of promote to all of our students, no matter where they are on campus, they'll have access.
That's incredible. I just, while impressive also, I don't want that to be intimidating to people who might be thinking about launching something. You have to start somewhere, and that demonstrates incredible growth over the 10 years of Operation Naloxone. When we launched in 2016, the campus pharmacy was the only open distribution site. There was really no emergency access point. We distributed free naloxone nasal spray through open trainings. Sometimes we would go into the university housing co-ops that were off campus. Sometimes we'd have trainings on campus that were available to students. And we were fortunate to have state funding at that time that made naloxone readily available. And we got some early reports of use, 10 reports, especially among the off-campus housing co-ops, ultimately were the places where we'd leave behind a box or two, and they'd hit up one of our students to try to get more. So you have to start somewhere. Direct distribution, a single access site is somewhere and has a real impact. So aspire to be the Operational Naloxone of 2026, but know that if you are the Operational Naloxone of 2016, 2017, you're also saving lives, and it's okay to start small.
Yeah, a lot of growth happened over, as you said, the 10 years. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Delandra, I'm just thinking about like what a cool opportunity for a student when they're not yet, a licensed pharmacist to be able to participate in this. Like, what was that like for your development?
Yeah, it was an amazing opportunity. One that I am just incredibly grateful for every time I think about it, because I think it was a very unique opportunity to be involved with Operation Naloxone. I didn't know anything about naloxone before I got to pharmacy school until I attended my first training, and I said, this is amazing. Like, I want to be a part of this. And I appreciate the way that Operation Naloxone serves as kind of like this leadership pipeline for students, because I came in as a first year pharmacy student. I didn't have any leadership experience or anything like that. Not that much, public speaking experience, but I was able to jump right in as a junior chair, and I had my senior chair who was there to guide me, explain the role, mentor me. And then the next year, I was able to serve in that senior chair or student director role. And so I appreciate that a lot. And I feel like, the person I was as a first year student is not the same person that I am today. I've grown so much.
And it's really amazing to see the growth that happens, to see these students step into their confidence in leading these presentations. That's an intimidating thing, and they're being seen as experts and asked these really challenging questions, and they really take it in stride. And you see them, kind of nervous maybe at the beginning, and then by the end, they're running things, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
I just would add that, I think the way that Operation Naloxone looks now is informed by the fact that student leaders were involved and had meaningful input at the very beginning. And if you compare University of Texas at Austin overdose prevention program to some other university, I won't call anybody out. The typical approach is to start with administration, to start with health services, and to think small and to think sterile. Naloxone stocked in the campus health center, available only with a visit at least to a nurse or to a prescriber, not widely publicized, not provided through open trainings, or when there are trainings, provided by somebody, a staff member, a faculty member who feels distant from the student. And it doesn't necessarily feel like the most welcoming environment, the easiest place to show up. I mean, when you have an open training to give out an overdose antidote, the people who show up are the ones who it's going to have an impact for are students who are using drugs. It can be students who know students who are using drugs, but for the most part, students who know people who are using drugs and are going to be there to save a life when that person's using drugs. It's another person who uses drugs. And those students are at risk of feeling like they're outing themselves in those environments. You have to build a lot of credibility and trust before you can get to sort of the mixed model that Operation Naloxone currently looks like, where there is deployment through existing university structures and staff members, but there's also the student aspect. And I think it meant a lot that in the early phases, we had pharmacy student organization leaders who built the program.
Yeah, that student to student rapport building and, peer to peer, so important for the people that you're trying to reach and the education you're trying to provide, while also being a really cool opportunity for the student leaders that are involved. And I just think about the development that goes into them. Well, for listeners who might be thinking like, wow, this is really cool, I want to start something like this, or, even bring a small piece of what you all are doing to their campus or setting that they work in, what are the necessary components that you would say are required to start something like this?
I can chime in on early barriers. And I think we were lucky that we didn't experience many after I arrived, because Lori and Mark had already run into some of those. And I think they were not the worst kind of barriers that you would hope are sentiments that would be long gone, but unfortunately, I don't think they are, about distribution of naloxone, encouraging illegal drug use, or the view that I think does still persist among some, that people who use illegal drugs deserve to have really significant negative consequences. I would hope that we would have an understanding of evidence and an ethical thought process that doesn't allow us to perpetuate any of those myths. And I didn't run into any of that being explicitly stated here at UT early on. I think there was general support, but there were PR concerns. What are donors and parents and regents going to think if we start promoting that we have a free overdose reversal drug on campus or in the dorms? Does that signify to people that UT has a drug problem? And that really wasn't the genesis. We were trying to be proactive, but we knew there was a serious issue that we needed to be proactive about. So I think those stories that Mark Kinsley brought from the community about students experiencing overdoses that we weren't aware of, that we never would have heard about without him, that pushed it over the line, because nobody wanted to, the alternative PR nightmare is to have a student experience an overdose somewhere on campus and not be prepared for it. So, I think it's about creating an understanding and momentum around the positive PR that can be associated with this, and more importantly, the positive real impact. And as programs like Operation Naloxone have grown, I think now we've got the evidence and the stories to demonstrate that in a compelling way. But I think that's really important on the front end. And if you have a high-level administrator or professional within the university who's just not on board, you're going to run into challenges. So it's really about building a coalition of experts and essentially placed individuals at the university that can support early movement. And once you get rolling, there's momentum.
Yeah, so going off of evidence, establishing the benefits of a program like this, and like incorporating the stories, like you said, can potentially help with buy-in from leadership at someone's university to get something like this going. Any other components, like Kate, that you would say would be important for someone who wanted to start something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as kind of going off what Lucas said, right? Like, I think having some of those, it kind of takes as little as one, and hopefully, a small team that really believes in this to kind of think creatively about how to establish that network. And so I think, first and foremost, access to naloxone or Narcan is essential, right? If you're
Mhm.
wanting to kind of distribute it or kind of make it accessible, we're lucky to have some state support, in that area. So I think that's one thing to look into. What are the state policies? What are the opportunities, just in terms of that access? But it really is a lot of relationship building, and I think creative partnerships. And so certainly students, I think we've made the case pretty strong for the involvement of students. But honestly, I think there's so many more partners than you might think that are eager to support this. I think there aren't many folks that I've encountered who haven't been impacted by an overdose or lost someone or know someone who's lost someone from an opioid overdose. And so there's a lot of belief and support, and an eagerness to kind of be part of a solution. Keeping centered on your mission. I think for us, celebrating those small wins feels really important. And I think there have been some buildings that we've worked with a bunch of facility operators to kind of be open or emergency sites, and we've looked strategically across campus of, where are the gaps, or how can we make it more accessible? And some of those spaces were like, totally, we want to support this, but we don't want to promote it, because there's that PR fear, or what will parents like? We do a lot of tours through the space, and so instead of being, I think, deterred by that, it really allowed us to have this conversation, to both educate those facility operators and think about, okay, you have students staffing these desks. What support, what education, what training do you feel would make you feel more comfortable? But also, it's not about a neon sign. It's about access to naloxone. And so if that facility and that building, they are the experts in their building, that's not for us. So it's really finding that middle ground. And I think that attitude or that collaboration is really key to building a sustainable model. But really, to make it happen, you need passion, knowledge, access to naloxone, and then just an ability to kind of look for those opportunities and find traction where you can.
Mhm.
And on that note of like partnerships and collaborations, like are there any partnerships or collaborations where you were like, wow, like, this is such an important, I mean, I'm sure they all are.
Yeah.
But are there any that you're like, you for sure need this, or are there any that even surprised you at
I
the
think
connection?
so many. I mean, I think that's been such a happy surprise of I mentioned the libraries earlier, as expanding, and that wasn't us, advocating for that. That was the library had the person who oversaw the facility in our main library, has personal connection to this, believes in the work, and then got promoted and asked to, expand. So it wasn't us really like trying to sell or it's not one-sided. It's really become this reciprocal relationship. And so someone in facilities who we might not think is, gonna invest a lot in a public health or kind of a pharmaceutical effort, finds it very personally rewarding too, and so I think they see oh yes, we have an opportunity to provide this kind of service, or the library is this community resource that we can lean into. A lot of the other work that we do is looking at community engagement, and there's a nonprofit in Austin that works with hospitality folks. And so our folks in the restaurants and bars that our student frequent, there's one bar in particular that's popular with students who had, I think last fall, a handful of overdoses in one night. And so we've been able to partner with that nonprofit to do operational naloxone trainings for hospitality folks. And that feels like a really exciting partnership to me, and a really important one. Because again, we might not think of that as a campus entity, but that is where our students are playing, living, working. And
Absolutely.
so knowing that, drug use can happen really anywhere, but especially in some of that late night or some of those hospitality, some of those West Campus establishments, being able to just have that conversation with hospitality folks, with bartenders, servers, and really kind of hear their questions, but also empower them to feel like they can respond. Those partnerships are really exciting to me.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what, Lucas, you were saying when we were talking about if someone wanted to start this, and you were saying, to incorporate students because faculty might, initially think, let's partner with, campus health services, which not to say that's not a good thing, but look at all the
Mhm.
libraries and hospitality services. Those are just two examples of partnerships that maybe a faculty member wouldn't think of.
Yeah, and I think, um, you know, thinking about who makes up your culture of care, right? And I think it's really everybody. And that's so much of our work is helping other people see their role in prevention. And I think with Operation Naloxone, again, there's been such great structure to lean on to get buy-in, to help people see themselves in the work and to recognize that it's not about the stigma or the problem. It's about being part of the solution.
Okay, so to our audience, take a moment to consider the setting where you teach or work. If you wanted to launch a program like this, what resources, partnerships, or champions would already be in place, and what gaps would need to be addressed first? For listeners who might be curious, what is y'all's approach for this student leader pipeline? Like how are the student leaders identified, and what are those years of leadership? What does that look like?
Right. So typically, they start off as anyone would, just as a attendee of a training. So they go, they learn more, and then they decide they want to be a student leader. So for myself, they put out, applications if you want to be a junior chair, and I saw it as a great opportunity to get involved. I was very interested in Operation Naloxone, and I really wanted to, work on my public speaking. So I just thought it was going to be great. So I applied, and I think there were a few that applied, so they looked through those, and then I was selected, and so I started off as a junior chair under my senior chair, and essentially I just started off giving the trainings with my senior chair, becoming more comfortable learning the material, answering questions, um, staying organized, and kind of balancing pharmacy school with going out and giving the trainings, and I was, mentored very well during that first year, and I was able to serve as the student director my second year of pharmacy school, with the new junior chair that we selected. And so it's 2 years, a 2-year commitment to Operation Naloxone, which I think really helps with maintaining the sustainability of the student leadership because, students come in, then they're not just immediately thrown in. They're not, just told to, just take over. It's a process where they learn, they become more comfortable, and then eventually they take over. And I think that it's a great way to maintain the continuity of it as well, while also providing an opportunity for students to, mentor each other, and then just be involved with Operation Naloxone, which is great in itself.
The other thing that I'm not sure has been mentioned is the inspiration that these pharmacy students are to other students. I think because of seeing these students in this role, because there is the specific training to kind of be the director, the student director of Operation Naloxone. But because of them, we've had students reach out to us from a wide variety of backgrounds and disciplines and majors that say, I want to do a research project. I want to do this certificate. I want to do this. And so it has really expanded kind of and inspired a lot of other students from other disciplines to be part of it as well in maybe a little bit of a different, less specific way. But I do think that power is really clear from the students.
That's so cool.
That's awesome.
Well, no program lasts 10 years without encountering some challenges. And, Lucas, you kind of mentioned some from the early years, but what have been some of the biggest barriers or challenges with Operation Naloxone?
I mean, I'll acknowledge the elephant in the room that I was there to start it, and a lot of that initial year or so of effort was on my back as a early career faculty member, trying to engage some key student leaders and support a burgeoning initiative. And we built it into something that was semi-sustainable, but when you're reliant on a single faculty member who's going to have shifting priorities and changing responsibilities over time, you put yourself at risk from a sustainability standpoint. So I think it was really critical that the UT Shift was launched, that we began to explore partnerships. And Kate provided us with some key funding and infrastructure and guidance at maybe like the 5-6 year mark. And that made it so that as when I ended up taking a position at the University of Pittsburgh and leaving Texas, that there was somebody to hand it off to. Faculty reliance is especially a challenge when you've got a program that's really about service. It's about improving health and building community. And it's not as much about research and scholarship and bringing in money. It might cost more money than it brings in some cases. And so that ultimately belongs in a permanent university unit that addresses related health issues or student needs and builds that community and momentum on a variety of related topics. So I think that UT Shift and Kate as an administrative leader there, that overcame the sustainability concern. But you never want a program this important to be too dependent on any one person, especially a faculty member.
We were really lucky. There was a lot of serendipity and a lot of people who kind of built something that was able to be sustainable. And I think, again, having it started with faculty got it started faster, honestly, I think, on our campus. And then, I think built enough kind of evidence and proof of purpose that then, we were able to cut through some of the potential administrative kind of like pushback. And so we were, this is a thing that faculty started that students have sustained. And then it just fits so naturally into our mission of shifting campus culture as it relates to substance use. So it was a really nice and easy partnership, though I imagine, that beginning, it's always hard to get something started and find traction and find those people. And so I think, again, those relationships are so key. And I think a barrier, is institutionalization and sustainability in any campus or any system, especially, I think, just to acknowledge, a really changing landscape of higher education with rapidly moving priorities, and new leadership can often, kind of create challenges or curiosities. And so weathering those storms is important. But I think, again, if you're building something really solid that's really grounded and kind of has a lot of student input, that has a lot of faculty buy-in, that has institutionalization kind of on your health services side or wherever that might be, those are going to be real strengths, and they're real challenges, right? And I think partnerships are challenges. I think it could easily be not as collaborative, but I think because the people are who they are, because we're united in the sense of purpose, it didn't become a territorial thing or a siloed thing, which can often happen in big campuses. And so I think those are potential, pitfalls that could happen. But I think we've been really lucky, but it's luck, and it's also a lot of hard work and intention and communication to kind of build this collaborative effort, because we really all see it as a community effort. So that feels really important. We talked about the stigma too as being a barrier. I think that's certainly a barrier to institutionalization. That's a barrier to signage. That's a barrier to PR. But I think it's also one thing in our trainings is really we talk a little bit about stigma. We talk about language and the impact of language, and so there are ways to kind of work with those barriers and make them strengths, but they're certainly there, and they can certainly be a challenge. And one thing, I think, financial, I'm sure a lot of folks, have that question of budgets are tight and getting tighter. And so how do you start this thing? And again, we've been lucky to be able to get Narcan for free, which has really helped us, again, expand and provide this resource. We've worked with a lot of community partners in that way as well. But we've fought for budget lines too, and trying to kind of make sure that we have dedicated people who have this as part of their job to really ensure not only that we can sustain, but that we are really staying on top of trends, best practices, because, culture can change. Naloxone, even the policies around Naloxone, Narcan have changed, and not always in a bad way, but I think it's being on top of that and making sure that we're on the same page and kind of, again, creating solutions together is important.
What's one lesson that educators should take from this story?
I would say that, as far as the student perspective, students are very interested in helping to lead programs like this. They recognize the importance, they find it meaningful, they're very capable, and they want to be involved with things like this. So I think that, giving them that support and giving them that room to really lead and grow and develop into professionals through programs like this is really important. So, you know, don't sleep on the students because they want to be involved and they can absolutely do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think similar with other partners that you might think would be resistance. But I think really what start small. It doesn't have to be, I think Lucas kind of mentioned this, it doesn't have you don't have to start at the top, but I think, starting small with those key partnerships and then celebrating those small wins and not being afraid to pivot or adjust and keeping, at the center what feels most important for you and your institution. I believe we'll continue to be strong, and I think we'll continue to build partnerships and continue to distribute and educate as we have. I think we're talking about ways that we can think system wide. UT is one of many schools in a system. There's also a lot of other institutions across our state that we now have some state legislation to kind of look at education in response to opioid overdose, and so I think we can be a great resource in that way. And then I think even beyond Texas, I think we can really build partnerships broadly to see our work grow. And again, I think the infrastructure that we're building and the networks that we're building and establishing are really strong for whatever might come next. And so I think there's a lot of good to be had of continuing to build this community so that whatever that might be in the best interest of students or our community, that we now have folks in place and communication lines in place and even distribution in place for whatever might come next. And we really have the ability to pivot and be creative, and we've demonstrated success in that. And I think that'll carry us forward into things we can't even yet imagine.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. And yeah, I know we've said it throughout, but so cool. 10 years. I hope it continues, as you said, for many more. And, Kate, Delandra, Lucas, thank you all so much for being here to share your story behind Operation Naloxone.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a great conversation to have.
Yeah, I was really happy to be here. Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Well, as you reflect on today's discussion, consider one idea from Operation Naloxone that could work in your own setting. What would need to happen to turn that idea into action?